Picture this. You're settling in for a cross-country flight, excited to be on one of those brand new Boeing 737-9 MAX jets. You know, that new plane smell. But mid-flight, something happens. You hear a thump coming from the side of the plane. Now, it's not enough to make you panic, but it's definitely weird. Then, over the intercom, the pilot says, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Well, folks, seems like we've got a slight issue with one of the door plugs, partially dislodged. We're going back to Seattle just to be on the safe side."
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but those aren't exactly the words I want to hear when I'm miles above the ground.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened on Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 this past January.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, the aviation world, they pretty much went on high alert.
Yeah, what's interesting here is that a dislodged door plug, while not exactly common, wouldn't usually cause this level of concern on, say, an older aircraft.
Right.
But on a brand new 737-9 MX, fresh off the production line, it raised red flags for the FAA. This wasn't just a random malfunction. It hinted at something potentially systemic within Boeing's manufacturing process.
Okay, so we're talking more than just a loose part here.
Yeah.
We're talking about potential system-wide issues at Boeing.
Exactly. And that's where our deep dive begins today. We've got a whole stack of FAA statements, congressional hearing transcripts, internal memos, you name it, and we're going to break it all down for you.
So let's rewind back to January 5th, 2024, the day of that Alaska Airlines flight. What happens next?
Well, the FAA didn't drag their feet. The very next day, January 6th, they issued an emergency airworthiness directive.
An emergency airworthiness directive, okay? In plain English, what does that even mean?
It essentially means the FAA is hitting the pause button hard. It's them saying, hold everything. This plane doesn't get to fly until we figure out what's going on. And we're not talking about just one or two planes here.
Yeah.
The directive grounded 171 Boeing 737-9 IMAX aircraft overnight.
Wow.
They were pulled from service immediately. And here's the even bigger deal. The FAA also halted any planned production expansion of the 737 MAX. Not just a temporary pause, but a full-on stop to any plans to ramp up production.
Wow, that definitely sends a message about how seriously they were taking this.
Absolutely. And to understand why, you need to consider what an emergency airworthiness directive actually represents. It's basically the most serious action the FAA can take against an aircraft manufacturer, short of a complete grounding of the entire fleet.
Okay, so we've got planes grounded, a production line frozen in place. What were the immediate next steps?
Inspections. Lots and lots of inspections. The FAA wanted a thorough examination of every single grounded 737-9 AMAX, with a particular focus on those door plugs, any related components, fasteners, anything that could have contributed to the incident.
These weren't just quick once-overs, were they?
Not even close.
Yeah.
We're talking about a meticulous multi-hour inspection for every single aircraft.
Yeah.
According to the reports we have, these inspections could take anywhere from 4 to 8 hours per plane, which created a logistical nightmare for the airlines.
Yeah.
It was a massive undertaking.
I can only imagine, but hey, better to be thorough than have another incident, right?
Telling me. Now, while those inspections were underway, the FAA also launched a full-blown audit of Boeing and Spirit AeroSystems.
For those who don't know, Spirit AeroSystems is the company that builds a big chunk of the 737 MAX, including the fuselage, right?
That's right. The fuselage is essentially the main body of the aircraft, so any issues there are a big deal. The FAA wanted to take a deep dive into Boeing's entire production process, their quality control measures, how they were collaborating with suppliers like Spirit AeroSystems, the whole 9 yards.
And how long did this audit last?
It was extensive. It took them a full 6 weeks to comb through everything. And what they found wasn't pretty.
Give us the rundown. What did the audit uncover?
The FAA's findings pointed to what they called non-compliance issues in 3 main areas. 1, Boeing's manufacturing process control. 2, their parts handling and storage procedures. And 3, their overall product control. Basically, they weren't following their own rule book.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, it's not just about one faulty door plug anymore. We're talking about a potential breakdown in Boeing's entire manufacturing system.
Exactly. And the FAA wasn't about to let this slide. They actually increased their on-site presence at both Boeing's facility in Renton, Washington, and Spirit AeroSystems facility in Kansas.
Oh.
Imagine having the FAA breathing down your neck every step of the way. Talk about pressure.
Whoa, okay, so with all this scrutiny, what does Boeing do? They can't exactly ignore the FAA, right?
You're right about that. They knew they were in hot water. In February 2024, FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker, the guy calling the shots, had a very direct conversation with Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun. And from the transcripts we've seen, Whitaker didn't mince words. He basically told Boeing, you've got 90 days to come up with a comprehensive action plan to fix these systemic quality control issues. He wasn't interested in quick fixes. He wanted a top-to-bottom overhaul of how Boeing operates.
Okay, so let's talk about this action plan. What exactly did the FAA want to see from Boeing?
The FAA laid out some very specific requirements. And central to everything was this. They wanted to see a complete transformation of Boeing's safety management system, or SMS for short.
Now, I think it's important to clarify something here. We're throwing around this term safety management system, but for those of us who aren't aviation experts, what does that actually mean?
You're right, it's a jargony term. Think of it this way. An SMS is like the safety net for an entire organization. It's a set of policies, procedures, and, crucially, a company culture that puts safety at the forefront of every single decision. It's about identifying potential hazards before they become problems, fostering a work environment where employees feel comfortable speaking up about concerns, and having a clear process for addressing those concerns quickly and effectively.
So it's not just about ticking boxes on a checklist. It's about creating a culture where safety is truly ingrained in everything they do.
Precisely. And the FAA was essentially telling Boeing, your safety culture needs a major upgrade, and fast.
Makes sense. So a revamped safety management system was priority number one. What else was on the FAA's list?
Well, they also wanted to see Boeing simplify their processes and procedures. Apparently, things had become so complex at Boeing that it was actually making it harder to ensure quality control.
Hold on, I've got to jump in here. This is fascinating to me. We often think more rules and regulations automatically mean better safety, but it sounds like that's not always the case.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
Sometimes too much complexity can actually create more opportunities for errors and oversights. The FAA wanted Boeing to streamline things, to make it crystal clear who was responsible for what, and to remove any unnecessary steps that could lead to confusion or mistakes.
So it's about clarity, accountability, and cutting through the red tape.
You got it. And it didn't stop there. The FAA also demanded enhanced supplier oversight. Remember, we were talking about Spirit AeroSystems earlier. Well, Boeing couldn't just point fingers and say, well, it's the supplier's problem. They needed to take responsibility for their entire supply chain. And this is huge. In the aviation industry, we're talking about parts coming from all corners of the globe, and ensuring those parts meet the highest possible standards is absolutely critical.
Absolutely. So we've got the SMS overhaul, streamlined procedures, and stricter supplier oversight. What else was on the FAA's wish list?
Well, the FAA also zeroed in on employee training and communication. They basically wanted to make sure that everyone, from the factory floor to the executive suite, was on the same page when it came to safety. The idea was to empower employees at every level to prioritize safety and, crucially, to speak up if they saw something that didn't seem right.
Going back to that door plug incident, is it possible something like that could have been caught earlier if the safety culture had been stronger?
It's certainly possible. If an employee had noticed a problem with the door plug during production, but they didn't feel comfortable speaking up or they weren't sure who to report it to, that could have had serious consequences down the line. The FAA wanted to make sure those lines of communication were open and that everyone at Boeing understood the importance of speaking up about potential safety concerns, no matter how small they might seem.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about creating an environment where people feel empowered to raise those red flags without fear of repercussions. It's about building trust and transparency.
Precisely. And the final piece of the puzzle was increased internal audits. The FAA basically wanted Boeing to be proactive, not reactive. They needed to constantly be on the lookout for potential issues before they snowballed into major problems.
It's like the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Or in this case, maybe a whole fleet of grounded planes.
You said it. So Boeing had its marching orders. 90 days to come up with a plan that would satisfy the FAA and prove they were serious about changing their ways.
And did Boeing manage to deliver? We'll find out right after this. So the clock was ticking. Boeing had 90 days to deliver a plan to the FAA, a plan that went beyond just fixing a door plug. They had to convince the FAA, and maybe even themselves, that they could change the way they operate, that they could create a culture of safety that permeated every level of the company. Did they pull it off?
By May 2024, Boeing submitted their proposal, a hefty document outlining their plan to overhaul their safety practices. They started implementing new training programs for employees, revised procedures to make them clearer and more streamlined, and put more rigorous checks on their suppliers. But the question remained, was it enough? And maybe even more importantly, was it genuine?
Because let's be real, companies can promise the moon when they're under scrutiny, but actually changing deeply ingrained habits, that's a whole different story. So how did the FAA respond?
Well, the FAA wasn't just going to take Boeing's word for it. Remember those weekly meetings, those monthly reviews we talked about? Those were still happening. The FAA had their own people, their own experts in aviation safety and manufacturing, constantly reviewing Boeing's progress. It was like having a permanent house guest who was also an aviation safety inspector, making sure you're doing your homework.
Okay, I'm getting some serious Big Brother vibes here, but it makes sense. The stakes are incredibly high. We're talking about people's lives after all. But while all this is happening, what's going on with the 737 MAX production line? Is it still at a standstill?
Here's where things get a bit interesting. While the FAA put a stop to any expansion of the 737X production line, they didn't halt the production of new aircraft entirely.
Hold on, I'm confused. They're saying it's okay to build new planes, even though hundreds of them are grounded worldwide because of potential safety concerns. That seems, uh, kind of counterintuitive.
It might seem that way, but it actually makes sense when you think about it. The FAA is drawing a clear distinction between the planes that were manufactured before the grounding, the ones potentially affected by those manufacturing issues we talked about, and the planes being built now under this new, stricter regime.
So it's a bit of a trust but verify situation.
Exactly. It's like the FAA saying, okay, Boeing, we're cautiously optimistic about these changes you're making. We'll let you keep building planes, but we're watching you every step of the way, every rivet, every wire, every line of code. And if we see even a hint of those old problems resurfacing, we're hitting the pause button again.
I can't imagine the pressure on those workers on the production line. Every bolt they tighten, every weld they make, they know it's being scrutinized, analyzed, probably photographed from a dozen different angles.
It's not just the workers on the factory floor either. Think about the engineers, the quality control managers, even the executives calling the shots. They know the world is watching, waiting to see if Boeing can regain its footing. Their reputation is hanging by a thread, their financial future is uncertain, and most importantly, they know that people's lives are at stake.
It makes you realize how complex this whole situation is. It's not just about a single faulty part or even a series of mistakes. It's about systemic issues, corporate culture, and ultimately, the immense responsibility that comes with designing and building machines that carry hundreds of thousands of people every single day.
It goes even deeper than that. This isn't just a Boeing problem. It's an industry-wide challenge. The 737X situation has exposed the vulnerabilities of a globalized supply chain, where parts are sourced from all over the world, and where maintaining consistent quality and safety standards is a monumental task.
You know, we've been so focused on Boeing and the FAA, but you're right, this has implications far beyond one company or one country. This incident has sent shockwaves throughout the entire aviation industry, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Because when the FAA grounded the 737MAX, it triggered a domino effect around the world. Remember those grounded planes? They weren't just in the U.S. Airlines all over the world had them in their fleets. And within days, aviation authorities in Europe, China, Canada, you name it, they all followed suit and grounded their 737 MAX fleets as well.
So it was a case of better safe than sorry for the rest of the world.
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. You see, the FAA is widely considered the gold standard when it comes to aviation safety. Their track record, their rigorous standards, their thorough investigations, they've earned a reputation for taking safety seriously. So when the FAA issues a grounding order like this, it carries a lot of weight. Other countries might not have had any incidents with the 737 MAX yet, but when the FAA speaks, the world listens.
So it's not just about following the leader, it's about trust and credibility. The global aviation industry relies on the FAA's expertise and judgment.
Precisely. And it goes both ways. The FAA also relies on the cooperation and expertise of other aviation authorities around the world. They share information, collaborate on investigations, and work together to ensure that the skies are safe for everyone, no matter where they're flying.
This really highlights the interconnectedness of the aviation world. It's a truly global network that relies on collaboration, communication, and shared responsibility.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And the 737 MAX situation has underscored just how vital that cooperation is,
Yeah.
especially as aircraft design and manufacturing become increasingly complex and supply chains become even more global. The FAA can't do it alone, and neither can any single country or company.
You mentioned earlier that the FAA is still issuing airworthiness certificates for the newly produced 737 MX aircraft. Can you walk us through what that process actually entails? I mean, how does a plane actually get cleared to fly?
It's a rigorous process, and it starts long before the plane is even built. The FAA is involved from the very beginning, reviewing the design of the aircraft, scrutinizing the manufacturing processes, analyzing the safety systems. Everything is under a microscope. And we're not just talking about a quick glance at a blueprint. These are in-depth reviews, simulations, and tests conducted by some of the world's leading experts in aviation safety.
So it's not just a matter of kicking the tires once the plane rolls off the assembly line.
Not at all. We're talking about a comprehensive, multi-layered process that involves thousands of hours of work, countless simulations, and rigorous flight tests. The FAA needs to be certain that the aircraft can handle anything it might encounter in the air, from extreme weather conditions to mechanical failures.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. All the technology, the engineering, the regulations, and the sheer number of people involved in getting a single plane in the air safely. It's a testament to human ingenuity and collaboration.
It really is. And it underscores the immense responsibility that both Boeing and the FAA have to ensure the safety of every passenger who steps foot on one of these planes.
So where does this leave us? Almost a year after that initial grounding order, what's next for Boeing, for the 737 MAX, and for the future of aviation safety? We'll explore those questions after a quick break. All right, so it's October 2024. It's been almost a year since those 737-9 MX planes were pulled from service. What's the current situation? Are those planes back in the air?
Well, not quite. Those original 171 aircraft that were grounded after the Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 incident, they're still out of service. The FAA hasn't given the green light for them to carry passengers again, at least not yet.
But you mentioned earlier that the FAA is issuing airworthiness certificates for the 737-9 ABX planes that are being built now under this new, more rigorous oversight.
That's right. The FAA has been pretty clear about that distinction. They're satisfied that the planes coming off the production line right now, with all the changes Boeing has implemented, those are meeting their required safety standards. So you could technically hop on a brand new 737-9 MAX today and take to the skies.
That's wild. I mean, I know the FAA has been incredibly thorough, but I can't help but think some passengers might still feel a bit uneasy about getting on a 737X given everything that's happened.
Oh, absolutely. The events of the past year have undoubtedly shaken public confidence in the 737 MAX. It's going to take time, transparency, and a proven track record of safety to rebuild that trust.
So what happens to those grounded planes? Are they just sitting in some hangar somewhere? Is it even feasible to bring them up to the new standards, or is Boeing better off just cutting their losses?
It's a billion-dollar question, literally. It's possible that Boeing could be required to make significant modifications to those older planes to meet the current standards. We're talking potentially ripping out and replacing entire systems, rewiring components, maybe even structural changes.
Wow.
It would be a massive undertaking, and the cost could be astronomical.
So it really comes down to a cost-benefit analysis for Boeing. Do they invest potentially billions in trying to salvage those grounded planes, or do they accept the loss and focus on the future of the 737 MAX program as a whole?
Exactly. And it's not just about the money. It's about reputation, it's about their relationship with the FAA and with airlines around the world, and ultimately, it's about their ability to convince the flying public that they've learned from their mistakes.
This whole situation has really put Boeing under the microscope. It makes you wonder what this means for the future of the 737 MAX program in general. Is this just a bump in the road, or could this be the beginning of the end for this aircraft?
It's honestly too early to tell. A lot hinges on how Boeing navigates the next few years. If they can demonstrate a genuine long-term commitment to safety, if they can regain the trust of regulators and passengers alike, then yes, the 737 MAX could recover. But it's going to be an uphill battle.
It's a good reminder that safety isn't just about checklists and regulations. It's about culture. It's about accountability. And it's about constantly striving to do better, even when no one is looking.
You hit the nail on the head. And this event, as challenging as it's been, could be a turning point for the aviation industry as a whole.
How so?
Well, think about the FAA's response. Their relentless focus on Boeing's safety culture, their insistence on systemic changes. It's not just about making sure Boeing doesn't repeat the same mistakes. It's about setting a new standard for the entire industry.
So you're saying this could have a ripple effect, pushing other manufacturers and regulators to reevaluate their own safety practices and prioritize proactive measures.
Absolutely. We're already seeing signs of this happening. Other aviation authorities are taking a closer look at their own certification processes, and airlines are demanding greater transparency and accountability from manufacturers. This isn't just about the 737 MAX anymore. It's about a fundamental shift in how we think about safety in the skies.
It's about recognizing that safety isn't a destination, it's a journey, a continuous process of improvement and adaptation.
Exactly. And it's a journey we all share, as passengers, as regulators, and as an industry. The 737 MAX situation has been a stark reminder of the stakes, but it's also an opportunity to learn, to evolve, and to create a safer future for everyone who flies.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive on the ongoing situation with the Boeing 737-9 MAX. Thanks for listening, everyone.